Welcome, everyone. This is the Libertarian Currents recent episode. We talk libertarian philosophy and policy, and we include special guests. This evening, we have a very special guest, Keith Tays. He's the leader of the Libertarian Party of New Brunswick, and they're heading to an election very, very soon. So we'll have him introduce himself in a moment. But we are streaming live at Facebook, YouTube, and X. If you're looking at any of those streams, you can get involved with comments and questions, and we can see your comments and questions live. You'll have a chance to ask questions of Keith or of Jacques Boudreau. Jacques is, of course, the leader of the Libertarian Party of Canada, and I'm a lowly board member, and I'm the producer of the show tonight. So I'm going to be behind the scenes and working on the studio while we have a great conversation between Jacques and Keith. So over to you, Jacques. Go ahead.
All right, thank you, David. And just a small correction, you said it was Libertarian Currents, but tonight's a Libertarian Lens.
Thank you very much.
All right. Well, Keith, welcome. I look forward to this conversation. It's, first of all, kudos to you and whoever worked with you to create the new party. We need more of those. So well done. And in fact, I would like to start by asking you how the party came to be and what the journey was like.
Yeah, so my name is Keith Tays, leader of the New Libertarian Party of New Brunswick. So we registered in July of this year, July 16th. So I would say about, let's see here, it would have been March or so. So there was a slightly more freedom-oriented party in New Brunswick. They ended up amalgamating in with the Conservative Party, and all through COVID, they were like, it was called an all-party COVID committee, so they were all in on everything, right? So,
But
so a lot of
sorry,
us.
Keith, did they have any elected members?
Yeah, they held the
And they
balance
did.
of power. Actually, so it was a minority government situation, and the People's Alliance, they were called. They were the closest we had to a Libertarian Party, right?
Okay.
The People's Alliance, basically like a PPC on a provincial level, that kind of populist right kind of movement. But a lot of libertarians in the party, which of course libertarians basically built the party, right? So they had 3 elected MLAs. When COVID happened, there was a big split in the party. I don't like to put a lot on them because a lot of our members are not really political at all, but they were as close as we could get to a libertarian party. So I started meeting with people about starting a new party that um, aligned more with like the freedom movement here, and it wasn't just a conservative kind of pandering, right? And all through COVID, once once the tide started to turn, as someone who was a libertarian since Ron Paul 2008 campaign, I really saw the opportunity to to sell libertarianism to the freedom movement, to the freedom convoy people. Um, so through all that, with all the protesting and all that stuff, so I met with a few people that were interested in forming a brand new party made up of those kinds of people. And we had a few like loose iterations, like New Brunswickers United and the Freedom Party and all that stuff, right? But the ones who were willing to do the work and really were motivated were all libertarians. So we just said, well, why don't we just make a libertarian party? Then we don't have to and then we'll just be um, that beacon, right? Like this is the standard, and then all other parties are authoritarian compared to us, right? So yeah, so that's how it kind of started. And then the more people I talk to, the more we're on board. We have people who are like they're just learning about libertarianism, and they're all in. Like as soon as they realize what it's about, they're all in. Um, so we decided to register. It was actually the beginning of June. I called Elections New Brunswick, and they said, "Come on in, get registered. This is the prerequisites that you need." So we we covered all that. We showed up to register, and they said, "Oh, you need to make an appointment with the lead electoral officer, and that'll be a month before you can see her." So then it was the end of June. We were en route to Fredericton again to register when they called and said that, oh, she's out of the office. She had to step out of the office and she's going to be out for 3 weeks. So then, yeah, so it ended up being towards the end of July before we got registered, with an election coming up in October, right? So that wasn't a lot of time. So our our loose plan was to register before, run our minimum 10 candidates, and just go through the motions so we get a little bit of training, because nobody in the party, I have the most political experience, and all I was a VP for the local for our ridings PPC um, EDA. So, and that was a long time ago. I have since left the party. Yeah, so none of us have any experience, so we all decided to just go through this election with the minimum number of candidates as like a learning experience. Um, and then once our name got out there, it just started to take off. We now have 18 candidates, um, none of which are actually like paper candidates. Like they're door knocking, and they're out there with literature. We don't have any signs or anything like that because we had no time to actually fundraise, and we all work full-time jobs. Like I work
Yeah.
50 to 60 hours a week. So yeah, but it's a good start, and I still have people reaching out to me wanting to be a candidate, not knowing that it's too late. So
Yeah.
um, I would say if we had another week, we would have got half the province full of libertarian candidates. So
What's the total number of seats?
there's 49 altogether.
49. And you're running 18. Well, I mean, given your circumstances, I think you're to be commended. That's a pretty good start. Now, I I apologize. I should probably know better about sort of provincial politics, but I'm well. I'm just learning that there was a quasi-libertarian party with 3 elected um, members. So there must be um, like a pretty good sort of libertarian streak in many New Brunswickers.
Yeah, there's a um, that's the thing. I think there's a large amount of libertarians in New Brunswick. They just don't know what the word means. Like,
Mm-hmm.
so we're still going through the sounds like liberal phase, right? But which we knew we were going to have to go through that. But um, yeah, there's a large contingent of rural areas, especially in New Brunswick, that are very uh, independent. Like they just don't want the government in their business, right? So they are libertarians. They just don't know what the word means. So that's the goal over the next 4 years, is to meet people, explain libertarian is not liberal, and kind of help the brand, right?
Okay, now in terms of the campaign, so you're voting on Monday, correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
So what have the major issues been on the campaign? Like what is it what are the main concerns of New Brunswickers at the moment?
So our healthcare system, for sure, it's falling to pieces. We've had, I think, 5 or 6 waiting room deaths Like people just died in the waiting room, just waiting. And that's not including the people who just wait because of, you know, wait times, right? So, you know, they instead of being able to go for their screenings when they should, they end up waiting, and then their cancer's in the third stage or something like that. So healthcare amalgamation is one thing that's kind of going under the radar that a lot of people were against. So 2021, I believe, 22, they amalgamated a bunch of municipalities. So like right now, so like St. Stephen is now called like Western Charlotte, I think, and it's like a larger amount outside. So St. George used to be its own town, and then Blacks Harbor was a village, Penfield was a village. They amalgamated all of these into Eastern Charlotte. So now we are a massive municipality. And of course, this raises the property tax of anyone living in rural areas and without any of the benefits, right? So that's been a real issue with anyone rurally, which is where I am. Aside from that, so there's policy 716, I think it's called. So this is the the trans issue in schools. Um, so that was that was a big issue with parents and parental rights and all this stuff. So, and we've kind of hit them all with like the hard libertarian approach. Aside from healthcare, we're advocating for the Singapore model, which is kind of a soft conversion into into the free market, right? Um, and
Well, here's your chance to elaborate a little bit. You know, there might be people listening who are very interested in the platform. So
yeah,
can you elaborate a little bit on that model?
yeah, sure. First, I have to caveat. So, because we're a brand new party, and in New Brunswick, for a leader to make a promise, an election promise, or to say like we are going to do this, that has to be costed, or it has to go through a process where it it's not costed, which is really great for libertarians normally, right? Because everything we cost will be a huge savings. But because we're a brand new party and we don't have the manpower to actually go through that process, um, we're just we can't have an official platform basically. But
Wow.
we are advocating in all the debates and stuff. We are advocating for um, the Singapore model. So, if anyone Googles right now the best healthcare system in the world, they'll find Singapore as number one in almost every list you find. So they have a free market healthcare system um, that has basically a somewhat mandatory savings account. So instead of paying taxes and then you hope the government does the right thing with the taxes, the money comes out of your account and goes into a savings account, or comes out of your paycheck and goes into a savings account. And that savings account, if you get hit by a bus, gets transferred to uh, whoever inherits your estate, right, or whoever you want to have it. Um, so it's not a tax at all, but it is mandatory. So you know we can revisit that part, but I'm really just trying to show people that the markets are the best way to handle healthcare. So so they have that, and then they have a uh, I believe it's 2% of what comes out of your pay towards healthcare. 2% of that goes into a trust, basically, and that's your social safety net. So for anyone that can't handle the costs, this will kick in for anyone that makes under $25,000 or something like that a year, right? So there is that. There is still some socialism in there, but it at least takes the control away from the government and puts the responsibility back into the individual.
Keith,
So
can I
yeah,
ask, on the topic of healthcare, and thanks for describing the Singapore model. I'm going to research more about it. I grew up in Western Canada, and people tend to have a crazy allergic reaction to the idea of privatization. Privatization, the word itself is like blasphemy in Saskatchewan. Do you have a similar history in New Brunswick with universal health care? And like I think people generally misunderstand that there can be such a thing as single payer health care with citizen run, citizen owned services. This is what they're trying to do in Ontario a little bit more now, but Doug Ford is taking a lot of heat over that. What's the history in New Brunswick regarding privatization and the topic?
yeah, it's basically the same. It's people are afraid of it. There's actually so in the leaders debate, which the smaller parties did not take part in, it was only the Green Party. The NDP wasn't even a part of it. It was just the Green Party, the Conservatives and Liberals. So the Green Party and the Liberals basically ganged up on the Conservative leader, who is our premier, with a conspiracy theory that he's destroying the healthcare system because he wants privatization. And of course, he was like, "That's not true. That's not true. I'm a socialist just like you." But yeah, so it's the same thing. It's a bad word, but I think it's a fight we just have to have. Like we just have to, and having Singapore, like if you just type in Google world's best healthcare systems, number one is will be Singapore. So that's at least a foot in the door. Like, okay, well, look, there's this for-profit model that has lower overall prices, has way better services, higher survival rate. Like it's just better in every single metric, right? So, um, yeah. So that
No, it is simply amazing to see people who are so adamant about saving or protecting a system that simply does not work. I mean, Canada's healthcare system is the second most expensive in the world. And you were talking about metrics when we're, looking at other OECD countries or G7. I mean, we rank very, very poorly in spite of having the second most expensive system. And people, almost like they want to defend it to the death. It boggles the mind. It makes it very difficult to have a rational discussion, actually.
yeah, we were at 35th the last time I checked, or something like
Yeah,
that. 30, 32 or 35, like something horrible for what we pay,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
Um, yeah, I just bring it down to like every time, every day we don't re-examine this, we're losing lives. We're killing people.
Yeah.
You kind of have to make that emotional argument, right? Because there's real people that when they see like in New Brunswick, especially because everyone's kind of connected, right? We have a pretty small population. When you see you, everybody knows somebody else that has lost someone to the healthcare system, and it's normally waiting or incompetence or something like that, right? So, um, and I think we have the most expensive healthcare system in Canada per capita in New Brunswick. Like we're like because we have two systems, right? We have the instead of having one bilingual system, we have uh, an English system and then a French system, and they're two separate. They have two separate boards of directors, everything for a tiny little
Are,
province.
are there hospitals segregated as well?
Yeah, yeah.
Wow.
Like Moncton, we have the George Dumont Hospital in Moncton, which is like the bilingual capital of New Brunswick, right?
Yep.
So the George Dumont Hospital in Moncton, that's run by Vitalite, and then we have the Moncton Memorial Hospital, which is run by Horizon Health.
Can I add, I've never heard of this. I didn't have any idea this was the case. So this is the first I'm learning of it. And the second thought I have upon hearing this news is that New Brunswick is the most bilingual province in our entire country. More people in New Brunswick speak both languages than any other province. To segregate the health systems by language just seems absolutely insane.
Yeah, it is. And it's been the division issue, right? So like the People's Alliance was that libertarian light, very light uh, kind of party, and they wanted to end duality, is what they call it, in favor of a bilingual system. So, and then go by regions, right? So where I live, I know more people that speak Filipino than speak French. Like it's very, very heavily English, right? But in order to work in any of these industries, you have to be bilingual. And then at the same time, the on the French side, they they always saw the People's Alliance as anti-French because of the media, right? Because they wanted to end this dual system, which was played in the media as, oh, they want to get rid of the French language, basically. They don't want to protect their culture, I guess. It's very, very strange. And it's been segregated since I can remember it anyway.
Okay, how about these municipal? So what's the word again? Aggregation? No,
Amalgamation, yeah.
amalgamation. There we go.
Yeah.
What's the party's position on
We would, so each new municipality, essentially, if they wanted to hold a referendum, they can. And if they want to go back to the way they were, they can. Because some places want to, some places don't. A lot of the rural places, they don't want to be part of a municipality and pay the high taxes. Again, those taxes would go anyway if we ever had any amount of power. But yeah, so our position is if they don't want, if a village or community doesn't want to be a part of that amalgamated municipality, they don't have to be. It'll be reversed.
Oh man, I mean, you have a non-coercive platform. It's just shocking.
Yeah, I know, right? Yeah.
Allowing people to decide for themselves what they want. Wow. Uh, you must you must not be popular. Um, okay, well, okay. How about things like uh, I saw that I think the province is now turning a surplus. What's
Yeah.
the platform regarding deficit and the debt and well no actually let me go one that is maybe in some ways more dear to my heart. How about schools, like public schools? What's the platform there?
Well, again, we don't have an official platform, but
Yeah, okay.
in every single debate, we are advocating for school choice, basically. So
Is
in
that a
Brunswick,
money follows the kid type thing?
yeah,
Okay.
basically that. Yeah, so that again, it creates competition in education, which um, is what's needed right now because instead of two sides battling for supremacy to get that premier spot, and then because right now that's another big issue. That's the one that's in all the attack ads and all this stuff right now. Is that the Conservative Party, which has moved, so they're only running I think 12 original MLAs. So 30 or so can't remember the exact number. So the majority of his current MLAs are no longer running because the Conservative Party has took a big step to the right. with the amalgamation of the People's Alliance. So they're taking the stance now, like we're with parents' rights, and you know, we'll impose your worldview instead of the other worldview if we're elected, right? So so we're taking the stance that we don't need to all fight for the ring of power. We can just let people choose how they want their children educated, basically.
Well,
Keith,
good.
sorry to interrupt you, Jacques. Keith, can you help us understand the kinds of concerns or arguments that you hear from others in New Brunswick when you suggest things like school choice?
Um, I've honestly not gotten much pushback at all. They all
Interesting.
love the idea. Again, I'm in a rural riding, um, and the uh, the leaders debate that we did have was all just the smaller parties, and they were all very obviously, if they're not voting for the main parties, they're already like out of the machine in a lot of ways. So they even they like the idea of just let people decide how they want their children educated.
And the money follows
Um,
the student.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So basically, I think it's $15,000 to $16,000 this year go to each school per student. So that would just go to whatever education the parents choose, right?
Now, yeah, is there I think there's a conversation to be had about accreditation. Like it can't just go to any old institution, regardless of their curriculum or like I think there's a place to say that the province needs to ensure quality, let's say quality of curriculum, quality of education,
Mhm.
uh, through accreditation of certain schools, private or charter or independent schools. But
Yep.
it's encouraging to hear that you find some like-mindedness among the non-establishment parties. Why do you think it is in New Brunswick that the establishment parties are against school choice?
I think they like the wedge issues. I
Ah,
think,
yeah, interesting.
yeah, they like that. So, it's I can't remember the what it's called, but it's basically they like to choose what the argument is and then argue viciously over that one issue. Even though the issue is easily solved, they would rather just ignore all the real ideas and use that as the wedge issue, I guess. It's all
Uh,
strategic voting, right? So,
in Ontario, many years ago, in fact, could probably be measured in decades, teachers' unions decide to hitch their wagon to the Liberal Party, uh, doing a lot of work on their behalf every election, giving enormous amounts, um, acting in a very dishonorable way by pretending to be um, non-affiliated and then running ads that were basically covers for the Liberals. Is there a um, similar thing happening in New Brunswick where teachers' unions have decided to back a particular party?
I would suspect yes. Um, I haven't seen it overtly, but again, I've been like everyone in this party has worn so many hats. We've literally driven all nighters to help people find like a commissioner of oaths and stuff like this, right? So, um, so I haven't really seen that. They have a lot. So in New Brunswick, they have a lot less power. I'm sure than in like Ontario, uh, just because of the shifting of the conversation, right? So
Right,
something
right.
happened. Something happened after that convoy. Like for one, liberal down here So the same way we have to explain we're not the same as liberal, we're libertarian. It's only starts with a few letters, but that's it. That's it. The provincial liberals are having the same problem with the federal liberals. Like they're running the most popular people in their communities, and those people are still like they're like I'd vote for you, but I'm not voting for a liberal. So they have a lot less. They have a lot less of an ability to manufacture a narrative in that sense. They do try for sure. Like when I do hear individual teachers attacking anyone, it's the conservative party,
Right.
and the same as nurses and all the unions, right?
David, if I may, I just want to address one of the comments here, which is any downside to voucher system. So, I mean, certainly my position on this would be that it's a big step forward to go, but it's not perfect because usually with the voucher system comes with way too much government oversight. Right, they will dictate curriculum and all kinds of other condition. And you know, as libertarians, I think we would say no. Free market means that you should compete on curriculum. You should compete on teaching methods. You should compete on a lot of things. So, yeah, to answer the question here, that's the one drawback. But it's if we're going to do things, again, to quote Tim Mullen before, like if less government tomorrow, you know, I'm all in favor. So let's go voucher system first, and then we'll take it the next step, you know, later on.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's how we got here, right? It was incrementally, little by little, like the ratchet effect, right? They would
Yeah.
take this, and then offer this benefit, and so we kind of have to. I mean, I'm not sure we have enough time to do it that incrementally, but you know, to say, well, let's just abolish the government and we'll govern ourselves. No one's really going to accept that yet, right? So,
I would add that it was explained to me years ago, and I still kind of believe it, that if taxpayers are going to pay for the education of young generations, we should at least expect that we're educating them to participate in the democratic process. Like help people to become smart enough to understand the democratic process and to be able to discern differences between party platforms. But that's not a big ask, I would say, but I think a minimally acceptable return for our investment. But other than that, I agree with Jacques. Your point is well taken. I hadn't thought how easy it would be for a school choice system, a voucher system, to become, you know, very elaborate with regard to regulation of curriculum and things like that.
Well, just
yeah.
consider. I mean, I through personal connection and the like. I mean, I am aware that there are many parents. In fact, I have access to some numbers. Many parents who are seeking alternatives. They're going to, like in my community, people from the outside are, including Muslims, are applying to join Christian schools. There are a number of people who've migrated to homeschooling because there are many people who don't like what's going on. Now, if you have a voucher system that comes with obligation to continue that type of nonsense, that freedom is somewhat moot, because are you truly free if you're just changing the person who's going to be compelled to implement some of that stuff? So like true freedom is to be able to say as a parent, I want my kids to go to school to learn English, French, math, geography, or whatever it happens to be, but it has to be the academic side of things. This whole thing about teaching kids about all kinds of stuff, including trans stuff, sex stuff. Like as a parent, if you don't want any of this, you should be able to send your kids to a school that doesn't do any of this. And again, with the voucher system, there's always the possibility the government will say, well, yeah, you can send your kids wherever you want, but we're going to make all kinds of demand in terms of what must be taught. So that's, again, I'm repeating myself, but that's the drawback, the potential drawback.
Yeah. Yeah. In New Brunswick, actually, so we have a very healthy homeschooling environment. Even before COVID and all the craziness, homeschooling was pretty um, accepted, I guess. And it had a good rapport. Like it had a good reputation. People, um, for the most part, knew that homeschoolers were going to be very bright, usually a lot brighter than the public school students. Um, a lot of I know a lot of engineers um, that were all homeschooled, and we don't really accept that. Like it's like the same line. You can almost repeat it at the same time with them. But as soon as you say something about homeschooling, they say, "Oh, well, they won't be socialized." Like it's like you almost guarantee that they'll say it back to you every single time.
I have an interesting thought to that point, which is it was only recently that society somehow decided that children should spend the majority of their waking hours with other children. Like this is a very recent development. Before the, let's say the widespread public school system, it was way more common that children would spend most of their time with adults and
Yeah.
Models. So I think that's an interesting point that homeschoolers, they are socialized, but they're perhaps socialized to interact more sensibly and more comfortably with people of other age groups and outside of their particular peer group.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, it all depends. There's also an argument too that I don't hear, and this is just my own thoughts on the issue. But there's also an argument too that parents that choose to homeschool their children typically are more involved, right? And it's not to say that every parent that sends their child to public school isn't, they don't care. But if you're actively choosing to take on the responsibility to homeschool your children, you're obviously as concerned, if not more concerned, right? You're not some lazy parent that's like, oh, I'm just gonna keep them home because
Yeah.
it's a lot harder to do that, right?
I'll share that I homeschooled my two daughters for about a year and a half in Ontario when the world turned upside down and the schools became just chaos. Online learning, in classroom learning, wash your hands 18 times a day, wear a mask outdoors, all these guys. I pulled my daughters out of school. We homeschooled for about 18 months. It was great. It was among the best things that I think we've ever done. I've returned them to school, first in an independent school in Ontario where I could consult with the leaders of the school and really talk to them about what curriculum they offer and what values they have. And because I wanted my daughters to have more exposure to extracurriculars and sports and which was something I couldn't quite provide. I couldn't provide that level of exposure through the homeschool. But I understand both sides now that I've done both things. I would advise most parents should try it,
Yeah, for sure. So,
or
if you
at least don't be scared of the option.
Well,
yeah, that's right.
it's funny because, we homeschooled our oldest for 1 year, many years ago. And this comment about, how about socializing? I never quite understood what the argument was about. I mean, they're in sports, they are like in music and other things, right? Where they get that experience anyway. They got cousins, they got siblings. I mean, I never understood. But even if the point were accurate, this is a typical nirvana fallacy, where you're coming along and you're saying, I believe that homeschooling is better than public school. And then they turn around and they argue that homeschooling is bad because it's not perfect, hence the term nirvana. When they suddenly completely ignore lousy math scores, lousy English scores. I mean, like in Ontario, the percentage of kids who master the minimum requirement in math is appalling. And then suddenly that doesn't matter because, boy, our kids are totally socialized. You know, they can't do math, but they're socialized.
Yeah, that's right. It's the same here. I think our literacy rate is, I think 60% of our province is functionally, sorry, 40% of our province is functionally illiterate. So
Yeah.
that's crazy numbers, right?
Yep.
So yeah, we went through the same thing with COVID. My ex-wife pulled my two boys out of school, like in the very beginning when they first shut it down, and then they never went back. They never had to wear masks at school. That never happened to them. The first year, I actually bought the Ron Paul homeschooling curriculum, and that is really great. Like the history and the video math classes, like they did really well with that. The second year, it was more basic, like more hands-on stuff. But yeah, they did really well. They ended up going back, and they were ahead. So our my children's school is a very small school. We usually have a graduating class of like 50 people, so it's a tiny school, which is good when it comes to accountability. Right? There's not you know
Yep.
thousands of students to look after and thousands of parents with all different wants and demands. Right? One thing about our party, we are libertarian, but we advocate for localism. So, like a more decentralized government. The government that we do have, we want it to be decentralized as much as possible. So when I break it down to them, I say we believe that 90% of what the federal government does should be done by the province, and 90% of what the provincial government does should be done by the individual and the communities. That's
This
our
raises a question, and actually, I'd really like Jacques to weigh in on this. I like the word localism. The debate that I often find myself in is with regard to smaller government, where people have, and I'll just share that my sister is heavily involved in municipal politics in Northern Alberta. She's been very active for a long time. And she and I often have a debate around this where she'll say, well, what do you mean by smaller government? Do you mean, um, you know, get rid of people who are helping to regulate the forestry industry or advocate forestry? Well, we've lost Keith
no.
for a moment.
I'm still here. Sorry.
Okay, sure.
Just,
But I think, and Jacques, this is my question for you. Would you say that generally when a libertarian says smaller government, they also mean localized governments? That these two things are nearly synonymous, or are they unrelated in my mind?
That has not come up very often. My sense that most libertarians would simply say a much, much, much smaller government. But let me stress again, because from a libertarian point of view, I think it's very, very important for people to understand. And maybe not people listening to us right now, but in general, people will say, well, you guys are all about chaos and you don't want any order. And I keep saying to people that to be a libertarian is to choose the rules under which you're going to operate, not unlike joining a club, right? Like if you want to join a golf club, it comes with certain rules. And if you don't like the rules, then don't join, right? But we just don't want the coercive aspect of compelling people to join a certain set of rules. So in many ways, when you make people free, you also make them free to arrange themselves at the local level to, quite possibly set themselves under local rules. So David, in short, I would say I've never really heard that, but I can see a libertarian model really downgrading things to the individual level, who would then possibly, with other like-minded people, arrange themselves in a way that they agree to, as opposed to having it forced upon them.
Well said. I think that makes good sense. Back to you, Keith.
Yeah, I would agree with that 100%. That's essentially what we advocate for is so with localism, as I would define it, I guess would be it's individualism, but then those communities will work together to achieve whatever goals they want to achieve, right? Yeah, so essentially, yeah, decentralizing the government as much as possible.
So this relates to you talked about the amalgamation of health districts earlier in the conversation. Was that just with health districts, or do they amalgamate municipalities?
Yeah, yeah, that wasn't health districts at all. That was just like they amalgamated municipalities. Like I no
Yeah.
longer live in St. George. I live in Eastern Charlotte.
Yeah, right.
Which spans almost to St. John, which is
And so
40 minutes away.
does the topic of localism resonate, do you think, because of that amalgamation? People, it's nearer to their hearts. They realize that
Yeah.
people that they used to have representation locally, but now it's, let's say, in a more distant city, or separated by multiple levels of other bureaucracy.
Yeah, it resonates a lot more. I think I heard Jacques say one time that the further they go with this, the more libertarians they're creating. Like the
Yeah.
more people are like, wait a minute, and then they look into alternative ways, right? So, so that
I see that too, that the pendulum has swung so far that more and more people are hitting their limits. And everyone has a different line, right? Everyone crosses a different line. There was a man a friend of mine told me of a man in British Columbia that was absolutely on board with all the COVID mandates. Yes, we have to vaccinate people. Yes, we have to lock down. Yes, we have to, shut the restaurants and schools. And then there was one of the sort of the common winter holiday, and he's an avid skier, and they shut down the ski hills in BC, like Whistler or Fernie or something. And this was his limit. Like it's like, why are they doing that? It's an outdoor activity. It's exercise. It's all those things. And this was his waking moment. And it just reminded me that everyone seems to have a different line, but because the pendulum is swinging so far, it's crossing people's lines, and they're sort of becoming alert to things they hadn't thought of before. And maybe this is one of those issues in New Brunswick.
Yeah, it's true. And libertarianism is a big tent movement, right? Like I know we're always painted as right, and I get and economically, I guess we are on the right, but not necessarily too, because in a libertarian society, you could have a town that's completely communist, right? So, like
Yeah, you
communism can
can't do the other
actually
way around. You can't have a
no,
communist country and try to have a libertarian community within it.
no. Actually, you almost always have to, because people will start starving, and then the tyrants will back off and be like, okay, you guys can trade meat and stuff, or but yeah, anyway, that does resonate. And like even in our party, there are libertarians who would once have been, moderate socialists, moderate conservatives, right? But because the overstep is just so obvious now that even when the current premier is doing something on their behalf, like that they agree with, he's doing it from the top down, like the very top down. He's just going around his cabinet and everything, and just he's going right to the school boards and saying, do this, do this, do this, get rid of this. Even if it's in their favor, they're thinking like this is not the way it should be. Like this guy wins a popularity contest for 4 years, and then we're at his whim. And of course, the exposure of globalist organizations and how that's getting more exposure. Um, when people appeal to nationalism over globalism, um, a small portion of those people will go a little further and say, well, why are we, like, especially like a big country like Canada, they're thinking like, why do we care so much about what's going on in BC if we're in New Brunswick? Like, why don't we localize our government and our economy more so, right? So it's not only an answer to globalism; it's an answer to nationalism and any kind of authoritarianism. I think that was kind of a tangent. Does that make sense?
Very much so.
Okay, good.
Okay, how about we go back to before I got sidetracked by schooling, which I said is very dear to my heart. Debt and deficit. What are your thoughts on that? I'm not asking about platform anymore, if you'll notice.
Yeah. Just my personal thoughts. Yeah. So I mean, we've run a surplus for for quite some time without raising taxes. So our premier was a businessman who worked for the Irving Corporation his whole life. So he runs things very like a business, like a CEO, right? So numbers wise, he does fine as far as dictators go. but it's very crony. It's a very crony system. Um, and in my opinion, the only reason that we have a surplus is because of the $1 billion that Trudeau gave New Brunswick, not us, gave the New Brunswick government to have a vaccine mandate, right? So in New Brunswick, 1 week the premier said there's no plans to have any kind of mandate, like it doesn't seem necessary. Like he was very nonchalant about that. And then Trudeau comes out and says, I'll give $1 billion to any province that initiates a mandate. So then
It
the
wasn't
next
just a
week,
mandate. It was $1 billion to implement digital ID.
yes, correct, yeah,
And that's an important point, I think, to not miss. Not that you intentionally missed it, but
no, yeah.
I just want to be reminding of that.
Well, that was like the doorway, right? That was the excuse, I guess, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that $1 billion, I think, has carried over. Like he did balance the books. We were in a deficit before this. Um, Again, I care less about deficit spending and surplus as much as I do cutting the costs of government itself. That is like I would rather run. Well, I wouldn't rather run a deficit. I'd rather not run a deficit ever. But instead of you know trying to increase revenue or balance revenue, give the money back to the people and or don't take it in the first place. Um, yeah. So, but in the real world that we live in, where the Libertarian Party is 3 months old in New Brunswick and has no power, I would prefer them to not drive us further into debt. I guess that's my answer.
Right. So what would constitute success for you and the party on Monday?
Uh, We are already. I'm already. We're way over any goalpost we've ever set.
Okay.
So 100 votes each, and I'm happy. Like the fact that I'm still getting messages asking if they can be a candidate. Like 2 days ago, I get a message like, "There's no candidate here. Can I run?" I know who Ron Paul is. I'm not the best, blah blah blah, but I'm a libertarian. Uh, yeah, the fact that I still get that, and if the election was in November, we would have probably 30 candidates. It was a matter of running out of time.
Right.
We actually had three whose their signatures were rejected on the last day. So even right then, we would have had 21. Um, so we are already way more successful than I expected. We have a few candidates that are well known in their communities, uh, very outspoken. Um, so one of them, there's a group here called the Mama Bears, and they essentially they started the pushback with the trans education in schools.
I
Um,
know the some of the mama bears in the southern Ontario area,
do you? Yeah.
and yeah, so it's nice to see that they're still active.
Yep. Yeah. Well, so um, one of them, her name's Barb Dempsey. She's been in a couple CBC articles, calling her the evil transphobic, whatever, right? Um, anyway, she's one of our candidates. She was like, once I explained school choice, she was like, "That's a way better idea." Um, so her heart is libertarian. She just didn't, she hasn't read all the literature, but I mean, she's really catching up fast. So yeah.
Where is she running?
So she's running in Hampton, Funday, St. Martin's.
Okay. Well,
Yeah.
I'll keep an eye out.
That
Um,
that's going to be a crazy riding because so they have a very strong Green candidate there who's going to split the vote of the Liberals, and then they have a woman named Fatine something, and she's like a televangelist running for the Conservatives, and then we have Barb. Like that's going to be like a battleground riding. And I would not be surprised if she won because she's been going door to door for a month now, basically.
mm,
Yeah, so it's been it's been a crazy ride for like when we decided to register, we thought, okay, we're just going to go through the motions, get some training basically, and then we can train people for 4 years from now. Because my ultimate goal was to have a political party that had libertarian principles that was geared towards the freedom movement in New Brunswick. Because like they're amazing people, they've taken up a lot of fights, and they've never backed down. When the cops were throwing people on the ground during COVID, they would come back the next day, and it would be like they just uh, they really had the guts. And so our two, also I wanted to mention our two highest PPC candidates in New Brunswick that got the most votes for the last election. They're both running for the Libertarians in this provincial election.
very good.
Yeah,
What's I suspect it varies quite a bit, but in general, um, what's it like to get invited to debate um, when you're with a small party? Because here in Ontario, it's not always easy. Quite often, they won't even bother to
uh,
invite you.
so we've been invited to all the candidate forums. So it's not necessarily a debate; it's more like a meet the candidate, and they'll ask one question, and then they'll go across the line and ask all the candidates what their answer is. So they don't really debate each other. The official CBC leaders debate and the last few leaders, they only included. They changed the rules, of course, right? So they only included parties who currently have seats in the legislature, which is now just the Green Party, the Liberals, and the Conservatives. So not even the NDP is in the debates, or the People's Alliance, which has been revitalized and is now a centrist party. Yeah. So there's a group called Harm Free NB. I actually don't know anything about them, but they put on they invited all the leaders to Fredericton to have a debate in Fredericton, for all the leaders as a response to the exclusion of the smaller parties, and only ourselves, two other small parties, and the NDP showed up to that debate. So the Greens never did, and the other parties never did. So to answer your question, I don't know because we weren't invited.
Right. We're in an hour. Any sort of final thoughts? Any message? Take this platform to give I don't know, some kind of pitch to people who are listening, or any parting thoughts?
Yeah, anybody in New Brunswick, if you want to get a hold of us, we're on lpnb.ca. You can send an email directly to me through there. And you can follow us on Facebook, on Twitter. We're on Rumble. There's not much going on Rumble right now. We're kind of in scramble mode right now, but and we're going to be working the day after the election to help build this party. I'm going to reach back out to everyone who's wanted to help, but we didn't really have a place for them because they're in a riding where there's no candidate or nothing's happening. We're going to build our RDAs, which is EDAs, but we call them RDAs here. Yeah, and actually, Jacques, I wanted to pick your brain if you don't mind, unless you're in a hurry. I wanted to ask your opinion about something.
No, go ahead.
So, just in debates with not in debates, but in conversations with libertarians and with other people that are in this kind of a movement, the issue comes up. Uh, so basically, if you imagine the world is a game of Monopoly, right? And for a generation, the cronies have been playing with the banker on their side. So when has anyone ever reached out? Has anyone ever asked you if there's a response to that? Is there like a reshuffling of the deck, or do we just cut back the government and just essentially play the game of Monopoly as if that never happened without redistribution, right?
So, just to make sure I understand, people are asking whether there would be a sort of an unwinding of gains that have accrued to people who were part of the system in a way.
Yeah, like, but like the cronyist kind of system.
Yeah,
Like it's very. Sorry, go ahead. I just wanted to hear your thoughts on it.
I think no, there's no doubt that there are many entities, people, companies that have benefited from being plugged in with the government. It could be that they've been granted certain powers, in many cases, protection by the government, and but I think the parsing of how much they got on their own, as opposed to privileges from the government, is just so complicated that I think in many ways it is best to let it go. Now, having said that, like many of these policies should end immediately, such that like if a company is surviving because they've been protected by the government, and suddenly we say, we're not going to do this anymore, then so be it, right? We can't. I mean, think of the CBC as an example. I mean, the CBC only exists because governments over the years have continued to push 1.3, 1.4 billion dollars in its direction every year. The Conservative are arguing that they're going to defund them. I mean, I know that my Libertarian government would actually sell them outright. So this is an entity that's benefited greatly, but I'm not going to chase them for the money that they got in the past. I think it's just too complicated. But they would certainly suffer from a libertarian government. So that would be my answer. So I think these things are just so enormously complex that it'd be wasting a lot of good time and money that can be better used somewhere else.
Can I add to that? I'd like to, I think that retroactive justice is a really dangerous game and requires a lot of aggression. To punish people today for things they didn't do, but maybe their father, their grandfather, their grandmother, whoever. But I do think that there's a place to properly punish white collar crime. And capital that is acquired by unfair means or illegal means should, I think, be an obvious target of proper justice. And that would take care of a huge part of your concern, I think. But I'm with Jacques also to say that to unravel all of that, it would be extremely convoluted and a fool's errand, let's say. But I would be on the side of properly applying antitrust law to ensure that monopolies are unable to rig the market, let's say, or collude with politicians. Like there should be, and that is the white collar crime. We all know that exists, and that just goes unpunished.
Yeah. I mean, let me expand by giving something that I lived very recently. I'm currently involved in a startup, and we were talking to this guy. I mean, we're hoping to bring him in as a large investor. And he asked the question to us. He said, why do you think that in this country we have a whole bunch of oligopolies? We do among grocers, telecom, banks, life insurance, right? The list goes on. Airlines is another one.
Transport.
Yeah, he was making the point that Canadians pay for all these goods and services way more than they would otherwise. But the question was, why? Why is it that we have so few players? And now, there's probably different answers to this, but his own belief is that from a regulator point of view, it's a lot easier to regulate 6 banks than to regulate 60 banks, right? So it becomes very self-serving. We don't want to have to do all this work of regulating banks, so we're going to limit it. And if Canadians lose as a result of that, well, so be it. But to your point, it would be, well, to the extent that these companies have become fat cats because of quasi-protection on the part of the government, I mean, one could always argue, look, my business model was such that without that, I would actually have done better, right? I mean, there's all kinds of arguments that are very difficult to parse out, which is why I'd be reluctant to do anything. But certainly going forward, it would be, you know what, we are going to open this country and we're going to allow telecom and groceries. And, I recently saw a display of alcohol at Costco in Hawaii, and I was taken aback. I mean, the display was beautiful, and they were serving or providing all kinds. And I thought, what a competition it would be to the LCBO in this province, which offers limited selection, lousy service, right? So this would be, again, another example where you say, we're not going to chase what happened in the past, but boy, going forward, you're going to have a problem because we're going to allow massive competition to come in.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I just wanted to pick your brain on that because a lot of people ask me that, and anything that we would implement would be against my principles in one sense, except for potentially like a negative income tax. But that would, I don't know. Anyway, that's a after the election, I wouldn't mind having another good conversation about.
I think that would be great to reconnect and have a reflection of the election. By the time that happens, we might have also witnessed the BC election and the Saskatchewan election. When is that happening? I forget, but both of those are coming up soon.
Yeah, yeah. I see the ads pop up on my phone for the BC election anyway.
Well, Keith, I mean, David, unless you have something else, I want to wish you the very best on Monday. I hope that you guys have a breakthrough, like you elect a couple of people, and yeah, it would be. I'll be watching. I can tell you that.
After the last few months, I would not be surprised. Honestly, like I would probably be surprised in the moment, but like with how fast, with how much the message resonates, not just in like the freedom movement, but with people that are just completely disillusioned with the regular party line. It's been invigorating for sure. There's been moments where I just like I can't do this anymore, and then I'll wake up in the morning and I have 12 messages from people that I don't know just overnight, like in the middle of the night, just messaging me like, "Hey, can I get some signs?" or just asking for something, right? Like, it's been really very cool experience.
Yeah, congratulations on that.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well,
it's great to
luck, and yeah, let's by all means let's reconnect later on and see how things went. Yeah.
So we'll be in touch, Keith, and congratulations on the courage to put your name forward. And thanks for being with us. I know it was difficult to get an internet connection, and you had to drive up the road to find a signal and everything. But it's been great to talk with you. So just for those that are watching, we really appreciate all your comments, your questions. Thanks for getting involved. Please share and like and tickle the algorithm to make sure that this information, this content gets to a wider audience. Remember, this is a Libertarian Lens episode. We run two streams of content. One is the Lens episodes where we talk about policy and philosophy and have guests like Keith. And then the Libertarian Currents episodes are about current events. I think Jacques and I are going to go online next Wednesday, for a Libertarian Currents episode where we'll talk about some of the recent goings on in Canadian politics. So thanks very much. Have a great night. Keith, drive safe. Take care.
You as well. Have a good night. Thanks, guys.
Yeah. Thanks, Keith.